Hello and welcome to A Word on the Word with Les and Tracy King.
In this series, we're going to be highlighting several different Christian martyrs.
And how their commitment to the Christian faith serves as an example for us to follow even in modern times.
And in this session, we're going to be talking about Peter, one of my favorites. Yours?
That's right, yeah. Peter, he also was known by Simon Peter, Simeon, Simon son of Jonah, and Shimon.
That's a lot of names.
So he's got a couple nicknames there, yeah. Uh-huh.
Now, Peter was one of the original 12 apostles of Jesus Christ and was one of the well-known leaders of the early Christian church in Jerusalem.
Right, now the New Testament indicates that Peter was the son of John and was from the village of Bethsaida, and Bethsaida was in the province of Galilee.
And according to the New Testament, Peter and his brother Andrew were some of the first of the 12 apostles chosen by Jesus.
Now, the Synoptic Gospels tell us that Peter was a fisherman along with his brother Andrew and the sons of Zebedee, James, and John.
That's right. And in Matthew and Mark, Jesus called Simon and his brother Andrew to be fishers of men.
Right, and here's how that reads in Matthew chapter 4, verse 19. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men.
And the Gospel of John also depicts Peter casting his nets for fish just before being called ashore by the resurrected Jesus, to be reminded that he had bigger fish to fry, so to speak, than that in the lake, right?
That's right. He had a lot of fish to fry with the rest of his life, right? So, all right, we're going to go on to our first biblical thought, and that is the rock of salvation, or the clay of carnal man.
I like that. Now, we're reading in Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. It says, "And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it."
So we all know that the Roman Catholic Church considers Peter to be the first pope and is ordained by Jesus' dialogue here in the rock of my church. That kind of indicates this in Matthew chapter 16, verse 18, right?
And what we'd like to point out is this rock that Jesus was talking about was not Peter per se, a man of clay.
Right. What Jesus was talking about was Peter's revelation that Jesus was the Son of God here.
And here's how that reads in verse 17. It says, "Simon Peter answered, 'You are the Christ, the Son of the living God.'"
It goes on to say in verse 18, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of John, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven."
Now, Peter was one of the first individuals in the New Testament to have God reveal his son Jesus to them for who he really was.
That's right. The rock of salvation was first revealed in Peter when Peter acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah.
And that's the rock that Satan cannot overcome.
That's right. We can easily think that a church, a man, or maybe even a gathering of people is what Satan can't overcome.
But we think it's the fact that Jesus came as the Messiah to save the world from Satan and sin.
That's right. Now listen, we're not trying to downplay the important role that Peter would play in the early church, everyone.
Not at all. But let's just be honest here. The only thing that Satan can't overcome is the completed work of the Messiah.
That's so true. All right, we're going to go on to our next biblical thought, and that is, God is faithful, not because of us, but despite of us.
True that. Now we're reading in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13. It says, "If we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot disown himself."
Now, what's amazing is that God sees the potential in each of us, even when we're unfaithful servants.
That's right. Jesus told Peter he would use him to build the early church, saying in Matthew chapter 16 that on this rock I will build my church.
You see, Jesus said this even knowing that Peter would deny him 3 times on the night that Jesus was going to be betrayed.
Well, here's what it says in Matthew chapter 26, verse 74. It says, "When he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, 'I don't know the man,' immediately a rooster crowed."
Jesus still showed his grace and faith in Peter, even though he knew Peter would deny him and deny him that he knew him 3 times the night that he was going to be betrayed and then later die on the cross.
And the key here is to trust that God has a plan to use you for good.
Right, and not to condemn you for the wrongs that you have done, right?
And the turning point for Peter was not when Jesus said he would build his church using him.
The turning point for Peter was when he actually felt remorse for denying, that he knew Jesus.
Right, and it was only then that Peter could be used by God.
Even after seeing that Jesus had risen from the dead, Peter had to be confronted by Jesus to confirm that he was valued and that he was needed in the kingdom.
And if you remember, the apostles were in the boat when they saw Jesus on the shore. And Peter, he couldn't wait to get to his Lord.
That's right. So if you remember, he removed his outer garment, he dove out of the boat, and he swam the shore ahead of everybody else who was taking their time rowing to shore, right?
And I doubt he did just a doggy paddle.
No. I think this was a sign that he wanted to get to Jesus as quick as he could, because he did love him.
Right. Okay, so let's go to our next biblical thought, and that is, he knows us better than we know ourselves.
Okay, we're in John chapter 21, verse 17, and it says this. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus had asked him a third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep.
Now, just as Peter had denied Jesus 3 times, Jesus asked him 3 times, Peter, do you love me? And if so, feed my sheep.
Jesus knew that Peter loved him, so this dialogue was not a question and answering session.
No, it was a prompting to Peter that Jesus understood what had happened.
And that he still loved him, and that he could still use him in the kingdom.
Exactly. Now, what happens most of the time is that we opt out of God's plan for our lives by thinking that his plan for us is about, how good we can be or our effort, right?
When really it's all about us just trusting in the goodness of Jesus and in the power of God. And sometimes we opt out of what God has for us because we start thinking, well, it's all about us and the good we've done and what we can do and all of our skill. And it's not about that at all.
Not at all. Now, Peter had to be confronted by the resurrected Jesus in order to know that Jesus loved him.
Oh, and that Jesus wanted to use him to advance the kingdom of God.
Exactly right. Okay, so let's go to our next biblical thought, and that's, he is interested in your beginning and your finishing.
All right, so we're in John chapter 21, verse 18. It says, very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted to go. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go.
In this verse, Jesus hints at the very way Peter would glorify God with his death.
See, this verse is famous for being interpreted as Peter's reference to his death and crucifixion sometime later in his life, right?
Yes, and according to Christian tradition, Peter was crucified in Rome under the Emperor Nero Augustus Caesar.
See, it is traditionally held that Peter was crucified upside down, and this was at his own request.
Well, Peter made the request because he saw himself unworthy to be crucified in the same way as Jesus.
Many believe that Peter was martyred around the same time as the Great Fire in Rome, probably around the year 64 AD.
And even though Peter denied he knew Jesus, he went on to play an important leadership role in the early church.
He absolutely did. Just like Jesus knew Peter's flaws and the wrong choices that he would make.
Jesus knows the wrongs you have done.
Right, and he still loves you.
And he wants to use you to serve others.
All you need to do is go to Jesus.
And just like Peter, remove your outer garment and swim ahead of everyone to embrace Jesus' love.
Absolutely. We want to thank you for tuning into this. We also invite you to come visit us at awordontheword.tv. And remember, go serve the King by serving others.
Thank you for joining Les and Tracy King for A Word on the Word. Visit awordontheword.tv to receive their latest audio or video broadcast. A Word on the Word is sponsored by First Century Ministry